Hello, Professor and peers, along with anyone else who might be watching. Today I bring you a presentation on the analysis of the film Seven, and it being a contemporary work of urban Gothic, taking place in a grim and bleak city, which feels almost alive. Crime is rampant, and hope within the city and the system of justice is at an all-time low. At this time of desperation, a serial killer whose methodology is rooted in the belief that he is chosen by God is now on the loose. I propose to you a question before we begin. Is it the city that turned the man into the monster, or did the man turn the city into his monster? Without further ado, this is my presentation 7, with the subtitle, A Sinful Depiction of Urban Gothic, presented by me, Riston Logan. Now let's begin. Here for you all, I have laid out and clearly defined 4 objectives, as well as goals that I wish to instill within you all, with the audience, during this runtime of the presentation. With already understanding that everyone has a familiarity and background with Gothic and Gothic elements, I want to lay out a strong foundation by identifying and analyzing those elements within this film while applying that to the new wave of contemporary Gothic, more specifically urban Gothic, and how it pertains to the movie Seven. For my second objective, I plan on describing the setting and how it utilizes symbols and motifs throughout its duration, displaying an atmosphere that truly exudes that Gothic feel, as well as how it is representative of the urban Gothic subgenre. With my third objective, I wish to apply a myriad of scopes to the film in subgenres such as literary, psychological, historical, philosophical, and cultural influences, and see not only a classic Gothic, but a new wave lens as well, emphasizing how much that work is affected by the genre and what it is known for, and how the film adds to that very definition. Finally, after I've established a solid foundation of this film's roots in Gothic and urban Gothic, I want to derive similarities and differences between Seven's take on the more modern urban Gothic and the original historical Gothic, which roots itself in late 18th century literature, being both evocative of the time periods they were made in. Let's start off with a quick overview and summary of Seven. This film follows 2 detectives, Somerset and Mills, Mills being a newly transferred rookie from the countryside as he takes on the big city, and Somerset being a hardened veteran who is retiring after one last case, who thinks he's seen it all, being tasked to hunt a serial killer who bases each murder on one of the 7 deadly sins. This film's plot is structured like a descent into moral and psychological underworld, with each crime escalating the tension and revealing more about the city and the detectives themselves, as they're on a race against time, with a week to find the suspect before he finishes his chain of 7 killings. Seven stylistically blends its genres, mixing neo-noir with urban Gothic, setting itself in a post-industrial city environment where it's always grimy, soaked in rain, and always crowded with people. The skyline is oppressive, with its tall buildings and skyscrapers trapping their characters rather than reassuring them that everything's going to be alright. In another way, the city's essentially alive, acting as a sort of mirror that reflects the despair and agony, along with hopelessness in its citizens, being the core element of urban Gothic, basing itself on the fear that the modern city itself is corrupting and dangerous, not the people. Symbolism also plays a huge role in how this film establishes its Gothic tone. The constant rain and stormy weather create a heavy, almost strangling atmosphere. It's not just bad weather, it's a motif reflecting the moral corruption and the inability to wash away society's sins, almost as if the city itself was crying. And of course, last but not least, the killer's crimes directly invoke the 7 deadly sins, which connect modern urban violence to medieval religious concepts of guilt and punishment. These symbolic choices help tie a contemporary story to a classic Gothic theme, tying it back to those themes of sin, retribution, and darkness within humanity. Now, Seven is a love letter to older literature and text as it draws heavily from medieval moral literature, stories that framed human life through sin, punishment, and that divine judgment. Works like Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, Michael Chancellor's Canterbury Tales, and Milton's Paradise Lost, all serving as thematic parallels throughout the movie. Now, these texts explored the consequences of moral corruption, often through their journeys into darkness and their encounters with sin itself. The killer in Seven, John Doe, essentially stages his own inferno, creating a modern-day descent into modern chaos for the detectives and the city. This duality appears in the contrasting personalities of the two detectives, Somerset and Mills. Somerset being more restrained, showing more restraint, rationality, and wisdom, while Mills is that exact opposite, being passion, impulse, and reacting on emotion. Their dynamic mirrors the internal conflict present within classic Gothic characters. Altogether, this film uses these literary influences to frame the narrative as a moral allegory, one structured like a medieval morality play, but executed through that modern, more grim lens, through urban Gothic. This blend connects the film directly to historical Gothic by doing so. Seven is deeply shaped by the cultural anxieties of the 1990s, particularly fears surrounding rising urban crime, moral decay, and the breakdown of social order. During this period, American cities were often portrayed in media as dangerous, corrupt, and simply overwhelming. Now, this film exaggerates those fears through its unnamed, decaying metropolis. The city in Seven functions as a post-industrial Gothic environment, always being dark and oppressive, reflecting late 20th century concerns about alienation, where institutions like law enforcement and government appear powerless against violence. In true urban Gothic fashion, the city itself becomes the source of horror and terror. This film dramatizes modern moral decay by blending contemporary crime with those medieval ideas of sin and punishment. John Doe's murders are structured around the seven deadly sins, a concept rooted in Christian theology, suggesting that modern society has abandoned all responsibility, creating tension between those belief systems and modern life. Historically, this conflict reflects a larger American philosophical struggle between justice and morality, with the legal system in the film following those rules and procedures. But John Doe is above that, so he doesn't follow them, clashing and creating conflict, whether and posing the question if law is enough to confront that evil, presenting a bleak, almost nihilistic worldview, suggesting that despite all the technological progress made, humanity remains flawed. That pessimism aligns the film with the urban Gothic subgenre, with those modern spaces replace Gothic castles, monasteries. However, the fear and corruption and darkness remain unchanged. Now, psychologically, Seven draws heavily from Gothic traditions that focus on inner darkness rather than monsters. One of those strongest Gothic elements present in the movie is the idea of the doppelganger, also known as the double. Detective Mills and John Doe function as those psychological mirrors of each other, as Mills is that impulsive emotion and anger. However, John Doe is more cold and in control, obsessing with that order. As they might appear as opposites, however, they're both completely connected and intertwined, both having a strong sense of justice, but differ in how far they're willing to go about it, reflecting order versus chaos, where neither side is actually purely good. Exploring the decay of the human psyche, a central Gothic concern, John Doe is not portrayed as a supernatural villain or monster, but as a human whose mind has been consumed by narcissism and superiority. He believes himself chosen to punish those in society, which aligns himself with studies of psychopathy, showing a lack of empathy, obsession, and a sense of purpose. That's grandiose. Urban Gothic identifies the psychological breakdown by placing it in a modern city. The concert darkness, confinement, and moral filth of the urban environment act as a pressure on the characters' minds, where Mills becomes increasingly unstable and Somerset is exhausted by the time the movie is over. Now, and Doe is the one thriving throughout all of this, suggesting that the evil mind does not come from monsters, but from the human mind itself, a key Gothic idea, especially when society, isolation, and obsession are combined. Now, philosophically, Se7en critiques the idea of modern progress. Although the city might be technologically advanced, it has regressed morally and ethically, suggesting that modernization does not equal improvement. The film also reflecting absurdist philosophy, where meaning is unstable and justice is unreliable. There are no clear moral victories, and even the defeat of the killer feels like a loss. John Doe exposes the troubling paradox. While his actions are undeniably evil, the society he tempts is deeply corrupt. This creates a moral ambiguity where justice itself becomes suspect, suggesting that in a modern Gothic world, evil is obvious, but goodness is uncertain and can easily be destroyed. Now, comparing Se7en and its urban Gothic subgenre to that of historical Gothic literature, we see that while the setting and monsters have changed, the core anxieties have still remained the same, both relying on a dark, oppressive atmosphere such as in Dracula, Frankenstein, those gloomy castles, decaying mansions, and storm-ridden landscapes, creating that sense of dread, have been translated into a modern city, showing endless rain, shadowy interiors, and claustrophobic urban spaces to replace those, having that decay still being constant. Now, both forms explore that corruption and human decay, often using monsters to externalize inner evil. But in Se7en, the monster is human, but the horror is still no less more Gothic, embodying that extremism and fanaticism, showing that evil no longer needs to be supernatural in origin. However, differing from that, the threat is no longer supernatural or aristocratic. Monsters and cursed bloodlines or oppression in upper classes have been replaced by the systemic and psychological city, functioning as the city itself functioning as the monster, reflecting the crime, bureaucracy, and alienation, while focusing on societal collapse in its entirety. And another major shift is the source of oppression, where classic Gothic would often critique the abuse of power by institutions. Se7en shifts that focus, where the threat comes from the individual ideology and absolutism of one person when they believe they have the authority to judge humanity, taking the control into their hands. Se7en modernizes Gothic tradition, preserving its emotional core while adapting it to a contemporary urban and psychological landscape. And here's my works cited. Thank you all for watching. What are your thoughts on Se7en and urban Gothic as a subgenre for contemporary Gothic? That is all. Thank you.